Elaine hated the idea of moving to Snook 2. Of course, what teenage girl would actually enjoy moving across the entire cosmos, across the entire known universe, uprooting your life, having to say goodbye to all your friends, having to quit all your teams, your clubs, even your job, and now you have to start over from scratch? She argued the entire way, giving her father the silent treatment the entire way. However, she didn't realize that that is exactly what her father wanted, a little bit of peace and quiet, as he got everything set up for when they landed. When they did, Elaine was surprised. Snook 2 was surprisingly robust. On its planet, it had a whole bunch of amenities she didn't expect, along with a whole mixture of species she'd only read about. There was a breathable atmosphere that was actually higher in O2 than she actually understood. The academy that she had to go to was within walking distance, only about 6 minutes if she ran, and the new house was actually larger than the one they had on Earth. She was still not exactly happy about her father dragging her all the way across the known universe, but she could make it work, she guesses. Walking into her first lecture hall, everybody was quiet as the instructor said, "Let me introduce you to Elaine." Everybody was actually surprised to see her. They knew a human was coming, but everybody was dead silent, and everyone just stares as they've never actually seen a human in person. To Elena's surprise, she actually makes acquaintances very fast. Her upgraded human body makes her faster, stronger, and much more flexible than anybody thought the human body could be. The biological upgrades inside her neural matrix makes her able to handle calculations extremely fast, faster than plugging numbers into a calculator without actually losing her creativity. This means that many of the acquaintances will eventually become friends. She has three main ones. A blue-skinned amphibious humanoid named Rika that picked up Elaine's mannerisms very, very quickly. In fact, so quick that her parents were wondering where in the hell she learned how to talk like that. There was also a red-skinned reptilian humanoid called Gleep that is very intrigued with human culture, will constantly ask Elaine what it's like on Earth. How do these people deal with things? How does this technology work? This, that, and the other thing. Oh, she wants to know about the history and how it changed. And then there was the quiet one of the group, a charcoal black-skinned humanoid. She was amphibious, but she looks actually like a little elf with these shining yellow eyes and contradictory hair that is bleach white like snow that just drapes across her body. The four became very, very good friends. And they rule the academy, but not through intimidation, at least not in the direction most would think about. Elaine is still the strongest female in the academy, as all her upgrades have made her just the epitome of what a human female would look like. Several other females kept asking for help on different items, lifting things, or maybe some studies, and she always gave the help. She even spent much of her own personal time to help because she listened to her father's advice, where he says, always elevate anyone that is not an enemy. You may one day need their help, and it's always good to have a lifeline to call. Another female that wasn't part of their group, which looks like a humanoid version of an orc, actually began to bother Elaine constantly as she needed assistance with her work. Not anything physical, but just something in the mental portions. This young one was very, very polite, but her very large brother constantly interrupted their communications, their conversations of any point. It seemed like he had a complete disrespect for humans, which stood to reason. When they first met up with humans, they thought they could actually bully humans, and found out the hard way that humans know their way around not just space combat, but down on the ground as well. The female orc was pulled away from Alina very hard, so hard that it was clear that marks were on her arms, sometimes on her back as she was thrown onto the side. Attempted to aid this orc female called Yeesh in education made her brother just more and more angry. So much so that even in the hallway, he would scream in her face, leaning down so he would be right there, less than a centimeter, as his own tusks began to whack across her face, nailing the point home. Eventually, he caught Elaine and Yeesh together, and he was so upset, so angry at this, that he actually walked up and struck his sister and began yelling at everybody and telling them how bad humans were, and he didn't want his sister anywhere near her again. Eventually, Yeesh's older sister actually came in, trying to be a defense for her, and yet that sister was struck as well. In the whole melee, even Elaine got grabbed, and she was thrown hard against the wall, so hard that one would think that they would hear bones break, but all they hear is the of air escaping the lungs. When that happened, and she actually fell to the ground as she was just momentarily dazed, the large orc came over, throttled her a few more times, and when she couldn't get up, he claimed,
"You have been defeated, so you will become mine."
With the mix of other species there, everybody was yelling at him that his own customs are not that of humans. He can't just claim ownership. That's not how it works. Enough of them were yelling that allowed Elena to run away to tell with the instructors. The orc yells back at her as she runs away,
"You are mine now. You will submit to me each time you see me, even if it's in front of all."
Elaine bolts even faster, finding one instructor and telling them exactly what's going on. The instructor simply raises her tentacles, looks over as she pulls off the protective lens from in front of her eyes, and then tells Elaine that due to the cultural differences, there's nothing she can do, nothing she will do. And this was enough for Elaine to actually sit there and just scream, "What the fuck?" After that outburst, Elaine immediately pulled out her communication device and sent a message, making sure that it was sent. And as soon as she got the ping from the reply, she immediately turned and ran back down the hall. When she got down the hall, the orc was disciplining the two other girls, very, very painfully disciplining them. Elaine then stops and screams at him, standing defiant against him, screaming about how small he has to be to wail on a couple of women, and how if this is how he is going to show dominance over the females of his own culture, he must be lacking in other areas. This made many of the other students begin to laugh, some hysterically, even rolling on the ground as they began to look down, and this simply made the tall orc stop and sneer. At this point, Elaine was standing there, straight up, hands to her side as though she was ready for a fight. Her friends came in close, but they were all afraid. They believed perhaps strength in numbers would be enough to get him to back off. But as he walked up, they realized that it's probably not going to be enough. The orc, once again, tells Elaine to
submit,
to fulfill her duties. And all this in front of everyone as he begins to loosen up his clothing ever so slightly. The students and staff alike all stand uncomfortably by. Due to the different cultures that are in this area with the different species, they're not sure if stepping in is the best of ideas. Not to mention that orc is quite large. And even if they called security, they didn't even know what was going to happen. Perhaps the security would say is just part of what they have to do. And everyone just kind of froze and watched. The orc gets in close to Elaine's face, yelling, and she's yelling right back at him in anger. He draws his arms back and he strikes several times, but she's able to brace herself for this good stance, and she's able to take all the strikes to include a strong backhand that almost slid her right into the wall, but she's still on her feet. And this almost seems to incite the orc. It seemed as though he's very interested.
I shall break your spirit, and I shall enjoy breaking your spirit. You and your entourage will all become my playthings.
When he says this, he turns to Z, the smallest of the group, and then he grins, pointing, saying,
Even though this one may not survive.
Z at this point may be standing there, but she is shaking in fear as the others move directly in front to protect her. The orc male then grabs Elaine and smashes her against the walls again and again.
You will submit to me and my entire clan.
He then once again throws her against the wall and she bounces off the wall very hard, everyone thinking that they're going to hear bones crack. They hear a few joints pop, but that's about it. That's when Elena, even though she's on one knee at this point, trying to stand up, says, "There's someone that might have a problem with that." The orc looks confused for a second, but still cocky, believing he has complete control over the situation. That's when Elaine raises her hand with all four fingers, motions behind him, and says, "Allow me to introduce you to my brother." The orc turns to see an almost 8-foot tall human, absolutely broad from one side to the other, with muscles so dense that they seem to push through the clothing on top. He's so large it looks like he was taking steroids inside his mother's womb and didn't stop. And inside his eyes was sheer hate. As he walked towards the orc, he simply stated, "I'm going to make you eat your own heart." The orc, still cocky, started to ask which one, but didn't get the words out, as a solid punch from that strong right hand directly to the jaw made several teeth and at least one of his tusks fly out of his mouth. Yet he's still on his feet as he staggers back. Then multiple strikes to the body over and over again, and as he goes to protect his body with his arms, another one to the head, and back and forth and back and forth. Clearly, these are straight up boxing strikes, but he's not trying to actually box. No, he's trying to sink his fists as deep into the body as he can, making sure that with each strike, he doesn't just strike the body. No, he's trying to strike the other side of the body. And with each strike coming from this human's large hands, there's cracking bones over and over again. The orc tries to strike, but they're deflected and caught, and with that unbelievable blinding speed, the human spins in a direction, then all of a sudden twists really fast, and you hear joints begin to break. Before anything happens again, strikes continue over and over, and blood is sprayed across the wall as the orc is pushed farther and farther back, but surprisingly still on his feet. At that point, the human rears up, backs a bit, slams both hands into the torso, lifting up the orc and slamming him into a display, breaking it right in half, leaving the orc in a sitting position, yet almost not even conscious as it spits out blood, jaw hanging by just a few ligaments after so many strikes. That is when Elaine's brother raises one hand, turns it into a knife hand, all fingers straight forward, drives it straight into the lower abdomen, and rips out the lower heart of this orc, the one that controls the lower portion of the body. Then, without hesitation, he shoves the heart deep into the orc's mouth and loudly says, "Now swallow," and punches the heart down the orc's throat with the other hand, and watching him choke on it. The brother then turns towards his sister and simply says, "Are you all right?" Then he addresses the group of ladies and asks if they're all right, and also thanking them for stepping in and standing next to his sister. Although, as he does this, he has to turn his eyes away, as he constantly tries to keep his eyes on their eyes, but his eyes are drawn away, as in other cultures, clothing is sparse or non existent. Elaine simply says, "Thanks for the assist, but I forgot to mention something." That's when her brother kind of looked like, "Oh crap, what did you do?" But in that moment, two female orcs walk up right next to him. They're still beaten, though their blood has actually stopped flowing, and they stand right there next to him, holding their heads down. "What the hell is this?" he says. Then he turns his face towards Elaine, but he points his hand at the girl, says, what is this about?" Elaine, not wanting to look into his eyes because she knows she might have messed up, says, "In their culture, you just killed their overseer. You see, well, when they get to a certain age, the eldest has to fight their father, and they fight to the death, which means he was the head of the family, which means they belong to you now." He looks back at the girls standing there with their heads down, then looked back to his sister and said, "You knew about this? Did you know before you even called me?" Elaine again looked away and looked at her friends, thinking maybe they would say something, but they didn't. They were too flabbergasted by the entire situation to actually do anything. Then Elaine, again, not looking into his eyes, says, "I didn't think it would end up, I didn't think you'd kill him, but how in the hell do I explain this," motioning to the girls, "to my girlfriend?" he says. Then he pauses for a second and then turns right to his sister and says, "Actually, no, you're explaining it to her, not me. You're explaining the whole thing. Let's go now." They walk out as the sanitation team arrives to clean up the orc's body that is now falling out of the display and lands on the floor with a slump. As they get into his transport, Elaine and the others discuss how they're going to explain everything, constantly trying to push it on to her brother, and he simply keeps saying, "Nope, you're talking. I'm not going to say nothing." "Well, not after I start." They were confused. Then he said, "And by the way, before we go in, I do have one request for you ladies." They all looked at each other as Elaine said, "What's that?" He yells back, "Pants! Put some on. And a shirt. Please. I don't know where my eyes are supposed to look." This made many of the girls giggle, actually, as they went through what little bit of clothing was on that little transport. When they finally walked into her brother's house, they ran smack dab into his girlfriend, coming out of the kitchen as she was cooking, and now she's currently holding a knife in her hand. Elaine pauses for a second and waits for everybody to come in as she says, before realizing the words coming out of her mouth, "Everybody, let me introduce you to my brother's girlfriend." A woman that is now looking outraged at the number of females that just walked through her door. She thought she was going to be the only non-human female in this entire house. She knew the reputation of human males and was promised that she would be the only one. Even though Elaine started to explain the situation, what had happened, how it all broke down, her brother's girlfriend still stared at her the entire time. In fact, she stared at all of them with a look in her eyes that said, "I'm about to feed you your own heart." When the full explanation was done, his girlfriend just looked almost defeated, a sign of resignation on her face. She knew that these two girls would now need a place to stay as they were not part of their clan anymore, and they would have to be in the house for a while until all this got sorted out. When she finally said, okay, they can stay for a while, that's when Elaine's brother stood up and said, "Let me introduce you to... Oh, wait, I didn't get your names yet." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on this rather goofy short story. Now before I go, I need to say that today's winners are MTF Guard with Ellen Crawford coming in a really close second. I also need to send out some holy crap big thank yous to the supporters of this channel, and they are Prozac and Pancakes, Steve Ewan, The Lockeen, MTF Guard, Brian Kemp, Guardian Sage, SS Demon, Erica Gem, and Julius Boone. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.